So it's lesson 3, part 2, and we've looked at the scaffolding tool that could build a create form for us. And want to do a little activity now where we explore a little more some of the unique syntax that we're going to see in the Razor views that we're using. So I want you to go on Blackboard. You may remember from lesson 1 that put everybody in the class in a group. You're in group. There's 5 groups in the class, and that's for doing some small in-class group activities, like you had your whiteboard activity in lesson 1. So you should have a groups link somewhere, I think, in your navigation bar. So click on that and to check which group you're in. It will be the same group you were in previously. If you can't find which group you're in, let me know and I can tell you. And we're going to do a small group activity. I'm going to start breakout rooms in Webex in just a moment. So I'm going to create 5 breakout rooms. And when I do that, you should be able to join any one of the 5. And so if you're in group 2 on Blackboard, then I want you to join breakout room 2. If you're in group 4 on Blackboard, join breakout room 4. And then going to give you don't need a lot of time, probably 5-10 minutes maximum for this activity. So you'll want to open up this link on Blackboard. Okay, Fatima, I will put you in a group in a moment. Okay. You're going to open this link up. It's going to open up a small PowerPoint slide deck. It's going to open it up in your browser. Please do not download the file. This is a shared file. We're going to be working on it together. The only way we can do this is if we work on it in the browser. So when it opens up, you probably have the option to edit the file in a browser. So you'll click that. It's then going to open up PowerPoint Online. So each group Sorry, bear with me. I made a little mistake here. So each group is assigned to a slide. So if you're in group 1, here is your slide. I've put a piece of code up that exists in, I've told you which file it's in, and some new view code that we haven't really worked with before. I'm going to give you 10 minutes in a breakout group to come up with an explanation of what this code means. And your group is going to add the explanation to this slide, as well as the names of everybody that's in the group participating. If you're in group 2, you're doing slide 3. Group 4, you get, group 3, slide 4. Group 4, slide 5. And group 5, slide 6. Okay, so this does count towards your learning activity mark. So I will start the breakout groups in just a moment. So Fatima, I will put you in group 2. So I'll add you to that group. So give me a minute. I will start the breakout sessions, and then you should get an option in Webex to click on breakout session and then join the breakout session that matches your group number. So I'm going to pause the recording. So if you're still working on your slide, you can finish up. So let's just have a look at what we've done so far. And then I'll also go over how anybody watching the lesson asynchronously can participate in the activity because it is graded. Okay, so Chris, Jennifer, and Nafise have examined this code, which we see in our shared layout file. We've got this partial tag, which lets us create a partial view. So a piece of a view without being an entire page. And we can inject this partial anywhere into our application. So we see it here in our shared layout. On line 28, so here we're inside of our navigation bar, and we've got our home, our site name and our links for home and categories, and then over off on the right, we have this login underscore partial. So if we take a quick look at what's there, we have some HTML code, but notice it's just an unordered list. It's not a full page. And in here, we've got links for registering, logging in, or for showing someone who's already logged in. So that partial gets rendered in our site up here. So it's a component, almost like a widget, that we can inject anywhere into a different page. Okay, I think group 2 is still working, so group 3 has found this render body statement, which is also in the layout file. So it returns HTML content from a child view into the master. So this is where our individual page content gets injected. So everything above is kind of our header. And then our individual view content gets injected here, and then we have the footer code down below. Okay, nice simple explanation from Colton, David, Michael, and Preston. So also in our layout file, we've got this render section scripts and whether it's required. So it can be overridden if a specific view uses a script, and it also tells us whether that part of the view can run with or without the scripts. So we can set required to true or false. Yeah, it's allowing for a global script to render in any other view that doesn't have one. That's right, to you. Okay, good explanation. Tushar and Raymond, we're looking at the create view that we just generated. So yeah, our form group is just a bootstrap class for organizing. The label obviously describes our input and our input control. And then we have the span, which is for showing any validation messages. Okay. What about this at the top? We didn't discuss this Asp Validation Summary. Any thoughts about what that does? And maybe we could add a note here as well. We looked at the Asp validation span. We already played around with it. What do you suppose this validation summary would do? Up at the top of this little code sample. Okay, good guess, Tushar. So we've got, notice this one says Asp validation for name, and this one says Asp validation summary. So they're both for displaying error messages, yes, but what would be different about the div on top and the span? We could use either one of them. What do you think the validation summary might do? Any guesses? Right, David. So if we wanted to show all the validation errors up at the top above the form, we could use the validation summary to do that. If we use the validation for spans, the error, which is the default, the error messages show beside each individual input. So we can use either format to display errors. Okay, so Tushar, Raymond, yeah, if you may just want to make a little note to that effect, that would be great. And then Gat, Jake, and Fatima looked at the login partial. We have these three lines right up at the top. The using statement lets us use the API for supporting login functionality. That's this Microsoft.asp.NET core.identity. The user manager, it injects the user page, so it lets us work with the user profile data. This description of the sign-in manager, it's injecting login functionality for the page. Okay. So I'll leave these slides up. So if you weren't able to participate in this activity live in class, you're watching the video later, there are additional slides for you. So this activity is graded. So starting at slide 7, I want you to go and find a new piece of ASP view code, copy and paste it in here, and then like the other groups did, put in an explanation of what that code means and add your name. So you'll have until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. to do this. And this again counts towards your learning activity grade for the course. So anybody who doesn't already have their name on a slide, you can do an example explanation of an ASP code snippet. Now this has to be Razor code, not just plain HTML. We already know all the plain HTML. So any code you find somewhere in a view that is new and unfamiliar, paste it in, put in your name and a description of what that code does. Are there any questions from anybody about any of the code snippets that we've looked at here? So in looking at our learning objectives for today, we've tackled 3 of 4. We've reviewed assignment 2. We've looked at scaffolding a view, a Razor view with a model. And then we've also explored some of the new syntax that we're going to find inside the Razor views. So the last thing we're going to do today is I want to make sure that we are set up with the software that you'll need for working with your database. You don't have to do this right now. So I did post an announcement with all the links you needed this morning. I will just go over that. If you need to do it after class, but before next week's class, that's fine. It's not absolutely critical, and I will record this part of class. You can always go back and refer to it. So you need 2 pieces of software. The first one is you need SQL Server, which is the database engine we're going to use. You can download it from Microsoft. You can download a free version. I recommend the developer edition. License for use is development and test in a non-production environment. So you can download and install this. It takes a little while to install. And I've highlighted a couple of notes when you run that install. Number 1, pick the basic install, and you may be given a list of components of what you want to install. The very first item is called the database engine. You need to make sure you check that. Otherwise, it'll install the program, but it won't actually give you a database server. So you can install all the components if you want. You don't need them all. The only one you really need is the database engine. So make sure if that's not checked, you choose that. And it will give you 2 options for how you're going to log into your server. And the 2 options are Windows authentication, which is the default, or SQL Server authentication, where it will prompt you to set up a username and password. It should just prompt you to download the executable, Kathleen. It links right to the setup file. I should mention these programs only run on Windows. If you are a Mac user, there is an alternative. but the link should just prompt you to download and install the executable. Okay, it prompts you to download it after the first one anyway. Okay, thanks, Jordan. So Management Studio, this is like the SQL Server version of MySQL Workbench that you worked with in your relational database course. It's better than Workbench. It's more fully featured. It's more powerful, but it's the same kind of idea. So this is the server, the first program, and Management Studio lets you connect to your server or any other server. So when you're installing SQL Server, you can leave the authentication set to Windows, but you'll need to give your Windows account permission. So there should be a button on that screen that says Add Current User or Add All Users. So you need to click one of those. Otherwise, you're installing the server, but you're not creating you're not giving anybody access to it. So make sure you choose that Add Current User or Add All Users to it. The last thing you'll need to do, there's one other link here. This isn't a software install, but this is an account setup. So we're going to be working with Microsoft's Azure Cloud Platform. Normally it's a paid service, but they give a certain amount of access to us for free as students. Okay, that's fine, Jordan. If you didn't get those options, that's fine. Those of you who are in computer programming, you already probably have these tools installed from last semester, from COMP2084, your C# course. If you're in the web program, you won't have SQL Server and Management Studio, so you'll be installing those for the first time. So for the Azure platform, if you identify yourself as a student with Microsoft using your Georgian credentials, they will give us $100 US worth of free services in the cloud. So this last link here, azure.microsoft.com. So if you click on Start Free here, you'll put in your Georgian credentials. Microsoft will send you an email asking you to verify your student status. And this will allow you to use the Azure platform. If you don't verify as a student, you can use the platform, but it's going to ask you for a credit card. If they know you're a student, you won't get prompted to pay, and you shouldn't have to pay. Now, the SQL Server downloaded install, it can take a while. So if anybody's running it right now, you won't be able to create your database immediately. You'll have to do it later. I will go through this process again in next week's class, but I'm also going to record it today. So if you're just doing the software install right now and you can't follow along with me in real time, don't panic. We'll go over it again next week. Yeah, this is the last thing we're going to do, actually, is I'm just going to create the two databases and we're done for the day. So I can stay in the Webex room and help if people need some help. I know Kathleen, Kat is first on my list. Kat, I do have a suggestion. Okay, we'll sort it. We'll do our best to sort things out. There are a couple of workarounds if you do have issues with the software. So I'm going to open up Management Studio and show you how to create a local database. As I mentioned in the announcement, you'll basically want two databases for this course. The Positive Pets database, well, that makes sense to just run on your local server. That's not a marked assignment, and if you run a local database, it's going to be faster as you're going through the class lessons. The second database is for your assignment, and that one will need to be hosted in the Azure portal. So I'm going to show you how to create a database in each. Again, I will record this, and I will go over both of these things in class again next week. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. And much like in my SQL Workbench, as soon as it opens, we get prompted with this login box. So I want to connect to my local server. It usually just when we install it, it uses, our computer name. So the default is just our computer name and Windows authentication. If you don't see your computer name here as the server, we should be able to find it this way. If I click this little drop down beside server name, there's a browse for more option, which brings up a little window that says browse for servers. And if I click the database engine, it shows me this is my local server. Kind of the same as localhost in MySQL, just uses the computer name. So I'll click OK, and I'm going to leave my authentication as Windows. So I'm just going to log into it with my Windows account. I don't need a separate username and password. And I'll click on Connect. Oh, bear with me. My SQL server is giving me a bit of grief lately. I'll have to try it this way. You shouldn't have to do this. I may have to do a restart myself. Oh, you know what? I think I just have to stop it and restart it. So I'm going to go into my SQL Server configuration, stop my server. You won't have to do this. This is just an issue with my server config that I'll have to fix. The errors are frustrating, but that's also how we learn. So I'm not going to get too worked up about it. It could be. Okay, I'm going to try again. It says my service is running. Try Management Studio again. I'll pick my local server. Okay, one more try. I think I'm going to have to do this. If at first you don't succeed, go and drink tequila. Okay, Matthew. Oh, it's funny, Matthew. I haven't heard from you all day. As soon as tequila's mentioned, I will remember that. Okay, maybe my third time will be a charm. Well, good thing we allowed lots of class time today. Our lesson was short. I'll try one more time. Yay, okay. So I'm connected to my local server. So I want to make a local database for our positive pets. Okay, so I expand my server here. And if I just right-click databases, I choose the obvious option of new database. And I'll create a database with the same name as our web project, Positive Pets. I never want any spaces in the database names. And then I just click OK. And if I click refresh, Here's my new database. It's empty, so there are no tables in here yet. That's fine. We're not going to build any tables today. We'll build tables next week. In fact, Visual Studio is going to automatically build the tables for us based on the models in our web project. So to connect locally, I just open Management Studio, choose my local server and click Connect. And then I just right-click Database, New Database, give it a name, and click OK. Simple as that to create an empty database here. So Global Grub, that was my Tuesday class. So now I've got 2 projects, International Food Store and a pet store. I'm going to have another one on next Monday for my Monday class. Now we're going to do the slightly more complicated version. I'm going to create a database in the Microsoft Azure portal. So let's go there. So the link, which I'll put in the chat, is just portal.azure.com. So I will go there. Now, Azure is much more than simply web and database hosting. Okay. So this is the main page. If I want to use a new service, I click on Create a Resource. And Azure contains tons of stuff. There's tools for building AI applications, things like facial recognition. There's data analytics. There's blockchain. Obviously, databases, which we're going to use. Internet of Things tools. Storage. We're building like a file library. We want to store files along with it. And then, of course, we're mostly interested in web and databases. So if I click on databases, we've got SQL database. So this is SQL Server. Now we can create other kinds of databases on Azure. Lots of different options. We can even use MySQL on Azure, but we're interested in the SQL database. So I just click Create here. So it should bring up my Azure subscription. Should say probably Azure for Students. It also allows us, if we create a lot of different services, it allows us to group services together. So let's say we're building 5 different websites, and each website has a web application and a database. If we want to be able to manage those together, we can create a resource group and put each project in its own group. So I'm going to create a new resource group. I'll just call it Thursday, Fall 21. The name's not really important. So it's a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. So click OK. And now it wants to know what name are we going to give the database. So I'll use the same name, positive pets. And now it wants me to create a server. So I'm going to click Create New, and it'll open this little window here. And it's asking me to put in a server name that will have the suffix .database.windows.net. And it wants me to create a username and password for the server. So again, I'll just call my server positive pets. Actually, sorry. I don't want this one to be positive pets. I'm going to change the name. Actually, I'll leave it for now. And I'll put in a login and password. And I will leave the location as East US. So Azure has servers all around the world. They have, I think, about 3 dozen data centers. So when we create a server, we have to say which data center is going to host it. So I'll just use the default. And they also have different pricing. Now, what I need to do is I want to create a text file to store my credentials. Because next week I want to connect my ASP.NET Web project to this database. They need to talk to each other. So I'm going to need the server name, database name, username, and password to go into Visual Studio next week. 7 days is a long time. I might forget the credentials. So what I'm actually going to do is I've created a file here. So I'm going to put this, yes, you can make it whatever you want, Jordan. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so I started making a file on Tuesday. So my server, we positive pets.database.windows.net, my DB. So I'm going to put these credentials in this little text file. So next week, when it comes time to add them to Visual Studio, I don't have to remember them. I've got them here. I'll just maybe star these out. I can remember what it is. No, the DB, no, only the password is case sensitive. That is a good point, though. I will put it in that way, but I don't think it will matter. But good point, Jordan, thanks. So I'm going to save this in a text file. So whatever you're creating here, put them in a little text file on your computer. And then I'll click OK. Now I need to change a couple of the settings. Well, I changed the server name. So the server name is positivepets.database.windows.net. It's lowercase. Now, by default, the default database is far too powerful. It's 2 cores, 32 gigs of storage. This is going to be a little tiny database. So I'm going to click this configure database to choose a less expensive option. Because this option will eat through our $100 of Azure credits too quickly. So when I click on it, it tells me, so I'm going to change this service tier. It defaults to general purpose. I want this. So the general purpose one costs $486 a month. We don't need that. In this dropdown, I'm going to pick the basic for less demanding workloads. We want the cheapest option. So we're going to need this for about the next 4 months. So this is telling us it's going to take about $6 a month. Yep, that's right. With cloud hosting, it's per use. So the more powerful machine you have, the more resources you use, the more you pay. So notice this is an estimate. This is not a fixed cost. We're saying approximately $6 a month Canadian. So I'm going to apply that. So again, under service tier, I picked the basic. This is the cheapest. So I only need 2 gigs of storage. I don't need 32 gigs. I can leave this option, this backup storage redundancy. We're not really worried about that. And then I can just click this review and create. So this allows us to store, Microsoft can copy our data to different regions. So my server's in the East US, if the data center is blown away in a hurricane or a tornado, I'd have the option to copy the data to, let's say, Eastern Canada. But I'm not going to worry about that. I'll click review and create. And it just sums up, okay, approximately $6 Canadian a month. I'm making a Thursday resource group. My server's in East US, called the database positive pets, called the server positivepets.database.windows.net. I'm using the basic 2 gigs of storage. And then I'll just click create. Now this is going to take a couple minutes. And once our server, it's going to create the server first, and then it will create the database inside of the new server. Once that's done, I'm going to go back to Management Studio, and I'm going to try to connect to my Azure database from in here. So for example, I already did it in my Tuesday class. I didn't save my connection. That's okay. So we'll let this run. As this runs, I'll also mention that Microsoft offers a whole bunch of certifications related to the Azure services. And we're hoping next winter to be able to actually provide the certification exams at the college. Now, normally these exams cost anywhere from $100 to $200 US. Because our department is a Microsoft partner, we have a number of voucher codes that will allow students to write some of the Microsoft certification exams for free. We're hoping to start that in January. So if you're interested, I can provide more information. I actually did one of the exams myself. I did the first level Microsoft exam, which we're going to offer, which is called Azure Fundamentals. So there's a whole bunch of free materials online. So normally they charge 99 US dollars. There's a whole bunch of free training material here. So you learn all about the different services in Azure. They've got a whole bunch of tutorials. All this is free. So I went through all this stuff in the spring and got my AZ 900. So if you're interested in these exams, reach out to me back in December and I can give you more info. You may be able to write some of these for free next semester. Okay, so my server's created. My database is being created. Should be finished in just a minute. Okay, so it says my deployment succeeded. I can go to my resource. So here's the database. So we can see the resource group, the server name, that we're in the basic pricing tier. So now I'm going to try to connect to it in Management Studio. So how do I do this? Over here I have this little registered servers window. If you don't see it, you can click on View and Registered Servers, and this window will become visible. So I want to add my Azure server in here. So I'm going to right-click Local Server Group. I'm going to choose New Server Registration. So I'm going to add my Azure credentials here so that I could try to connect to the database. So I'll click on that, and it brings up this window. Okay, what's the server name? Well, it's positive. That's database.windows.net. So your server, it's always going to be .database.windows.net. And whatever server name you created in the Azure pool. The authentication, in this case, we can only use Windows authentication for our local server. This doesn't work when we're connecting to Azure. So we need to change the authentication type from Windows to SQL Server. And that enables the login and password box. So I'm going to put in the username and password that I just created in the Azure portal. And then I want to click Remember Password. Now I can test out my connection. So I'll click Test. And we got this error. Testing failed. It cannot open the data server requested by the login. The client with this IP address is not allowed to access the server. To enable access, use the Azure Management Portal to create a rule for this IP address. So what the heck does this mean? My username and password are actually correct. So what is this error? I actually expected to get this error. how come it didn't connect to my database even when I entered all the credentials properly? This behavior is actually by design. You got it too, Sharp. You're absolutely right. Excellent guess. So by default, when you create a database in the Azure portal, it does not allow remote connections automatically. So I'm just going to click OK here. And I can fix this by going back to the Azure portal. And on the toolbar for my database, there's this option in the middle that says Set Server Firewall. I'm going to click on that. And then I've got a few options here. So there's a button here that says Add Client IP. I could click this, and this will allow my current IP address access. So that would temporarily, for today, that would work. I'm going to do something else, however. I don't want to just allow this IP because maybe tomorrow I go to my office and I'm working on the project. Well, if I'm only allowing my current IP address, as soon as I leave my home and go anywhere else, my access is going to be restricted. So instead, I can create a rule down in this section. So I want access to my database from any IP address as long as I have the right username and password. So I'm going to create a rule here called all. And my starting IP will be all zeros. My ending IP will be all 255s. So with this rule, I can take my computer anywhere, and as long as I have the right credential, I can connect to my database. So you'll need to do this in your assignment, because not only do you need access to your database, but I need access to it. I may have to look in your database in order to either help you debug problems or to mark it. So best off to allow all IP addresses in. And then I can click the Save button up here. Once I click Save, get a message saying it's updating the firewall. And then it copies these values out of my 3 text boxes and it writes the rule here, where I could modify it or delete it. So now I've enabled remote access. I should be able to go back to Management Studio now and try to connect again. So now I'm going to click Test. It says, yep. Connection succeeded. And then I'll click the Save button. So now my database connection is saved here. You can see it's got my Positive Pets database. So now anytime I want to connect to it, I can just double click it. And now I can expand my server. So this is my Azure database, which is also empty. Okay, so if I look in the tables, there won't be anything here. You'll notice it's a bit slow. It doesn't load as fast. My local database, it's instant. So much faster to work. So for our in-class database, better to work locally. Just going to be faster. But for your assignment, you will want to create it in the Azure portal, because your database and your web application need to be hosted live on the internet. So we're going to use Azure for this. I will go over both of these processes again next week. So if you are behind because you're installing the software, don't worry. I will post the recording later today so you can try to go through this at home before next week's class, but I will also go over it again next week. One last item before I stop my recording for today. It's come up in several classes this week. Please make sure that you check the checklist in each week's folder. Okay, it will tell you all of the things that you need to do, over the coming week. So this way you won't miss an assignment or where to find something. You'll know exactly what to do. So for next week, you need to complete the week 3 quiz, which you'll find in the week 4 folder. You should go through the coding activities we did today. And if you did not yet participate with a group in the View Syntax PowerPoint exercise here, please make sure you do that by next Wednesday at 5 o'clock, because it is for marks. Yes, there's also that, David. That's what the checklist is here for. So you don't have to remember. I'm telling you what's here. Just remember to look at the checklist. It tells you. Make sure you've set up SQL Server and Management Studio, and read over assignment 2. You can start creating your project and designing your model classes and setting up your database in the Azure portal. Okay, that is it for today. Kat, I know I need to help you with your code generation tool, so if you have some time to stay in the room, I'm happy to do that. If somebody else needs help, we can look at that as well. I will post the recordings later today. And all the code we've done today is up on GitHub for you already. Okay, so that is all for today. I hope you all have a great week. Please make sure you get your software all set up before next week's class.